How do I get a zygote?
Weeks?
No, what is a zygote? How do I get it?
It's after the fertilization sperm with the ovum after like 6 days.
Now it implants. Yeah, it's the egg and the sperm that get together. It's a 2-cell organ. It's a conceptus. Once it gets up to 16 cells, it's called what, Asil?
The zygote, or I didn't hear you.
Once it gets to 16 cells, what is it?
Gamete?
No. What is a gamete? What's a gamete?
Gamete, the zygote, 200.
No.
Oh.
Okay,
plus
a
the
gamete.
cyst.
A gamete is a sperm and an ovum. That's a gamete.
Oh, yeah. And
When they join,
they
So they're
become,
haploid, right? When it's gamete, it's haploid. When it's
yes,
zygote, it's
yes,
diploid.
correct. Okay, so a zygote is from conception to 15 cells. Once it gets to 16 cells, it's like a little ball, and it's called a marula. Okay? It's still traveling from the ampulla into the uterus. Once it enters the uterus, it's still dividing, it's still going through cleavage, and it turns into a blastocyst. A blastocyst has 2 layers of trophoblastic cells and an inner cell mass. Those trophoblastic cells, syncytotrophoblast is the outer layer, and it puts out enzymes like meat tenderizer.
You say the trophoblast is the outer layer?
Well, it's 2 layers of trophoblast. The syncytotrophoblast puts out enzymes, and it breaks down the endometrium, making the cytotrophoblast easier to anchor to form a placenta. It is that inner layer of trophoblastic cells that will become the primitive placenta. Okay? Let's go back to ovulation. Ovulation happens on day 14. It's because of that spike in the LH that causes the egg to pop out of the ovary. Ovulation. Before that, the first 14 days of my cycle, my anterior pituitary gland is producing FSH, follicular stimulating hormone. Okay? Once the body has enough estrogen, then it's going to let go of the egg. And now my body is putting out that the Graafian follicle is now called a corpus luteum. That corpus luteum is putting out mostly progesterone, some estrogen, but the most common and the most exact is estradiol. Estradiol is the indicator for ovulation. So that way, if I go through infertility treatments, the doctor can look at my estradiol and tell me how close I am to ovulation. Okay? Because they only have a small window to be able to harvest those eggs.
Is that what, you know those at-home tests, ovulation kits or whatever, is that what it's testing for? The estrogen? Like,
That
what is those-
probably so. I don't know. Because, you know, they have those pea sticks now that can help you with your ovulation.
Oh,
Mhm. Okay? So, and estradiol is the best indicator for ovulation time. Okay, because a 14-day ovulation, that's a guesstimation because we're all different. And we can live in a house of women and everybody will eventually be on the same cycle.
Yeah, why is that?
Has anybody in here ever read The Red Tent? Oh, I'm gonna have to see if I can go to Half Price Books and get that. It's The Red Tent. It's during biblical times, and all the women in the village end up in the red tent at the same time, and they all have the same husbands. You know, because back then they didn't have just one partner. You might have 2 or 3 partners.
The guys, right?
Huh?
The guys could. But the women
Yeah,
couldn't.
the guys could. Excellent book. So I'll have to see if I can find it and bring it in, and y'all can pass it around. It doesn't even take you 12 hours to read it. Okay, but what was I talking about?
No, estradiol.
Yeah, oh, the cycles. Okay. So I had ovulation. My ova is floating up. The fembri suck it up. It goes through the infundibulum. It goes to the ampulla. And most of the time, that's where fertilization takes place, is in the ampulla. So I got pregnant. So it's still traveling through the isthmus, traveling through the interstitial, and now it's in the cavity of my endometrium. It floats around there for a few days, like 4 days, it could be, and then it finally is going to implant. It's the progesterone in my cycle from my corpus luteum that is the main indicator for my endometrium to be able to hold a baby. If the endometrium is too thin, that has a different name for it. Luteal deficiency, meaning my corpus luteum, how do I describe it?
It's not releasing.
My LH is not making my ovary let go of the egg. So it never has a chance for my endometrium to grow. And that in turn becomes polycystic ovarian syndrome. Okay, or Stein-Leventhal. Okay? So now I have 46 cells in my conceptus, 46 chromosomes. Okay? 2 of those are going to be my sex hormones. Okay? It's either going to be XX or it's going to be XY. Now, a gamete. A gamete of a female is XX. The gamete of a male is XY. So it's the male sperm that will identify the sex of the baby. Okay? So here's a picture of it. Here's a gamete, and here's a gamete. Okay? Here's my gamete, and now I have a male baby, and I have a female baby. Okay? XY. Now, my ova has a membrane around it. That membrane is the Zona Pellucida. On the outside of the Zona Pellucida, I have the radiata. I think it's a zona. Is it a zona? Corona radiata. Okay. That kind of, it's like little villi that help travel the fallopian tube. Okay? Once the sperm penetrates the zona pellucida, it closes back up and it changes its composition so another sperm cannot enter. Okay? Because if 2 sperm enter, then I'm going to have a molar pregnancy and I'm going to lose the baby. There's never going to be a baby there.
If there's 2.
If there's 2 sperm.
I'm thinking about twins.
Yes, no. Okay? Everybody understands so far? Okay. So in return, now I have a zygote and my chromosome count is 46. 23 from the father, 23 from the mother. Okay? The tail will eventually break off. The mitochondria, does anybody remember what the mitochondria does? What does the mitochondria do?
Energy?
Yeah.
Swing, what is it?
It is respiration for the sperm.
Yes, okay. So you have a nucleus here and you have a nucleus there. Here's the corona radiata. Here is the zona pellucida. The sperm goes in, it loses its tail, the zona pellucida closes up, no other sperm can get in there, but anything can happen.
Oh, so our egg also has a nucleus.
It has a nucleus also. Okay, so ovulation, day 14, it spits out the egg, goes in through the infundibulum, travels, ampulla, it's fertilized, the sperm has traveled up this far, it is fertilized, the zona pellucida closes up, now I'm pregnant. So I have a 2-cell structure that's going to divide, and it's finally 16 cells, and it floats around in the endometrium until it reaches 200 cells, and then once it reaches 200 cells, it's called a blastocyst. The blastocyst has cytotrophoblast, syncytotrophoblast, and an inner cell mass. Syncytotrophoblast is the one that puts out the enzymes. It's the cytotrophoblast that implants and will become the primitive placenta. Okay? So, by day, see here, it takes 1 or 2 days just to float up here to be fertilized, and it takes day 6. Now, day 6, is that after ovulation or after fertilization? It's after fertilization. Okay? Now, this is going to be really, really important for you to know whenever we get to twins, because there's multiple things that can happen. If the marula doesn't implant, if the marula turns into a blastocyst and doesn't implant. Okay? Okay. Here is a gamete. Here it is a gamete with the sperm. Only one should get through. Now I have 2 nucleuses. I have 2 cells. Those 2 cells are going to divide. 16-cell marula. It's going to still divide. And now I have cytotrophoblast, syncytotrophoblast, and an inner cell mass. It's going to be the inner cell mass that's going to become the baby. Let's go back to the endometrial layers now. So the blastocyst is floating around inside my cavity. Okay? Now, my zona basalis is now decidua basalis. My zona functionalis did not slough off because I'm pregnant. Now that is called decidua functionalis. It's gonna be those spiral arteries that are going to help with the blood flow with my placenta. Okay? Now, when the blastocyst starts implanting into the uterus, okay? So that uterus, because of the enzymes that the syncytotrophoblast is putting out, the endometrium gets a little bit more hyperechoic than the regular endometrium. That's called decidua reaction. Now we're gonna see that first. That's gonna be the very first thing we see. And then we'll see the gestational sac. And then we'll see a gestational sac with a yolk sac. Okay? It should implant 6 to 8 days after ovulation. 6 to 8 days after ovulation. It takes about 4 days for it to burrow down to the decidua basalis.